Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. I want to welcome back to the program Jeet Heer, national affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine. Jeet, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, always a pleasure.
I got a first question for you. You asked this question, I think, on Monday in a piece at The Nation. Will Benjamin Netanyahu drag America into a big Middle Eastern war? It is a tribute to you that this question has nearly been answered just 4 days later. What?
Well, I think he's definitely trying. You got to give Bibi credit, right? He's making the effort. I actually think it's a very interesting thing that's going on right now because both the United States and Iran do not want a big regional war, nor do the Arab autocracies that are aligned with the United States. And so what you're basically seeing is this very weird kabuki dance of people trying to respond to various Israeli provocations, taking things to the limit of war, but not war. There's a lot of kind of very curious calibration that's been going on. And this actually, I mean, to give credit where credit's due, George W. Bush, by his idiotic decision to invade Iraq, created a situation where Iraq is very friendly to Iran and now acts as a kind of back channel or go-between between the United States and Iran. So even before the last Saturday's bombings, the U.S. and Iranians were talking and basically setting out the parameters for Iran's response. And that has continued, that the U.S. is basically trying to choreograph this wrestling match so that, both sides can get in their swipes without it actually being a situation where, we get World War III. How long that can continue? That's an open question.
Right. I mean, we're walking on thin ice, essentially. But it is when you step back and just sort of contemplate this idea that in this incredibly volatile region, everyone there, this is like you got your best friend who's trying to drag you into all sorts of fights. But even the people he's trying to pick fights with are no, not interested. It's just sort of weird. I mean, this is we're aside from the horrors associated with this, when you step back and you look at this is a very, very strange dynamic, and one which I can't find, at least within modern history, any type of analogy to this.
Actually, I think the analogy would be in before the First World War, which might not be the reassurance that you need. But before the First World War, both the Russians and the Austro-Hungarians and the Germans had various proxies in the Balkans, as did Britain and France, and they were using these proxies to carry out battles. And basically, as these Balkan proxies started to carry out horrific terrorist and assassination attacks, the great powers got dragged into war because what's in the interest of the small power is to get the big power to join them in their battle and fight their fight for them. And that's not necessarily in the interest of the big power, although they want to show they want to have this alliance system. So I think that is the worrying precedent, that you could have a situation. I also sort of remember that Warner Brothers cartoon with the two dogs, one of which is a very tough guy and the other is a little dog that follows him around and keeps getting into fights knowing that the big dog will join him in his fight. And that is basically the American-Israeli relationship.
You can also, I think, draw some comparison to the final years of South Africa's apartheid regime, where they were beginning conflicts. It was Angola, Zimbabwe. You can see a bit of the parallels of a regime of this kind being unsustainable and collapsing upon itself. But of course, the American-Israel relationship is so unique, given the fact that it's the only country that has this powerhouse domestic lobbying organization in AIPAC with tens of millions of dollars that has been quite effective in basically buying our government in this way. So much so that, Joe Biden still has not made any substantive action, despite some rhetorical shifts in funding Israel and supporting it diplomatically, including what we saw yesterday at the United Nations vetoing that Palestinian statehood resolution.
Yeah, no, the South African analogy is, I think, exactly on point. And it's partially a matter of, like, there's two factors at work. One is the personal survival of Benjamin Netanyahu, where, like, he knows, like, if there's no war, he's done. And so, like, if he's being pressured to, like, ease up on Gaza, he has to have another war. But beyond Netanyahu, and I think we should never just blame Netanyahu, there's the Israeli political system. And the instincts of that political system have always been to, like, talk about anything other than the Palestinians. That's to say, like, never get to a position where you actually have to negotiate a two-state solution. And the theory that they've always had is there's always some other factor, whether it's Saddam Hussein or the Iranians, that are the real problem. I mean, this is like, you might recall right after October 7th, there were, like, these articles in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere making the absurd argument that this was, like, basically an Iranian plot, that the Iranians had caused October 7th. And it's because they would rather fight, like, a big war with Iran, which is a state and where, you can, like, bomb things, than actually grapple with the real unsolvable dilemma that they have. They occupy these population that will, refuses their rule. So there's a kind of distraction effect going on.
But it's also about galvanizing Western support, right? Because this supplemental, which I know we'll talk about, this aid to Israel has been kind of just sitting there. And at a time when public opinion in the West, for the base of the Democratic Party here, a majority of people, Biden's voter base, are outraged by this and want us to change policy on Israel. And I'm sure Netanyahu saw that. And so this, like, original strike on the consulate in Syria, killing this top Iranian general, appears to me as a very obvious attempt for him to galvanize Western military support if the threat of Iran looms, as public opinion was beginning to change on this on the support for this genocide.
Yeah, no, I think that is the rationale and the logic. Although I have to say, like, if we get into a large war and there are, like, a large number of American soldiers dying because of a war that Israel started, public opinion, which is already souring on Israel, it's going to go to a whole new place.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, did you see this thing in the supposedly in the Times where supposedly Israel was surprised that Iran took issue with this? With it? I'm not joking.
They said they didn't see it as a provocative action.
They didn't see it as a provocative action. I mean, what is stunning to me is, like, I have seen no, outside of, like, all the speculation you talked about in the first days after October 7th, I have seen no reporting whatsoever, and plenty of reports to the contrary, that Iran was involved in the planning of October 7th, or was even aware of it beforehand. I mean, that seems to be the consensus. And yet, here they are in the midst of this assault on Gaza, which is supposedly, according to them, existential. They're just, like, side bombing, Syria and Iran. Like, we didn't even think that anybody would even notice. Like, what? Who is this for? It feels to me like this stuff is now just for deluded people to have something to hang on to. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not convincing anybody.
Absolutely, yeah, and I want to just underscore that. Like, the only people that were saying that the Iranians had foreknowledge was basically the Wall Street Journal and a few other right-wing outlets that were clearly being fed information from Israeli intelligence. But the consensus of American intelligence is the exact opposite. That not only were the Iranians not involved with October 7th, they were really taken by surprise by it. And that actually explains a lot of their behavior of both Iran and Hezbollah afterwards, where they've been really trying to, have hands off. They don't want to get involved with a fight that they did not know about and have any role in. So I actually think, who is this for? I mean, like, it is based on it's partially based on, appealing to that hardcore base, And as Emma says, galvanizing Western opinion, like there is a sort of, if you can have a war with Iran, you can get that. But it's also based on the very practical reality that Joe Biden has given them a blank check and has always said, you have ironclad support. There are no red lines. So if you have someone who's like, willing to back you up all the way, let's say you're like a rich kid and you have a daddy who will like, every time you crash a car or, you get into a bar fight, he will always bail you out, right? Lawyers always send lawyers guns and money. Then you're going to act that way, right? This is the spoiled.
Biden literally did that with his kid, but anyway.
I think. Yeah. Well, and with his dogs. I mean, this is actually like Biden's way of relating to people.
The irony is that I feel like I think Netanyahu knows that he needs to have these ongoing dramas to maintain his position, to not get booted out of office, I think, on some level. Like, there has to be some measure of drama. I also can't help. I mean, I think that there is, and while I agree with you, Netanyahu is more symptomatic of a problem that exists in the Israeli body politic, as opposed to being sort of some outlier. I don't think he is at all. But I do think that this is another case, and I feel like this happened during the Bush administration as well. In fact, that's what I would imagine there was like some dissent as to whether Israel should have unilaterally pulled out of Gaza and just converted it into essentially a ghetto, an open air prison, or whatever it is however you want to characterize it. But that there is no ballast of which the Israeli administration can use the U.S. government, it feels like, as a way of like justifying tapping the brakes at any point. I mean, maybe this is happening internally, when, you got even like Ben-Gvir, I think it was, who said like the attack on Iran, our retaliation for Iran's retaliation was weak and whatnot. I mean, obviously they have their incentive structure, but nobody can credibly say like the U.S. is going to cut off aid if we do anything different. I mean, like that's the thing. They can't even say that.
No, absolutely, they can't say that. No, Biden has given them a blank check, and this is what you get. And on the Netanyahu point, I mean, absolutely, his personal survival rests on more war. But if you actually look at, like, the reporting on what's going on in the war cabinet, the so-called moderates, like Gantz, like they're actually like more eager for a war with Iran than Netanyahu is. So I think structurally, it is like the Israeli state. Basically the war in Gaza has gone very badly. I mean, like, if you think about it, like it's been 6 months and like Hamas is still there and they haven't recovered the hostages. They've done horrific things. And yes, of course, if you have a modern army, you can kill a lot of civilians, but they have not achieved any of their military goals. And nor can they. I mean, they have no real like logical military goals there. So they need another avenue for showing military prowess. And Joe Biden has, like he said, here are the car keys, go wreck another car.
Exactly. What do you make of the vetoing of the UN resolution for full membership for Palestine? The U.S. excuse on this was like, well, we do support a Palestinian state, but we think it should be negotiated between the parties, which essentially means they shouldn't be able to have one unless Israel gives them permission to, which, as far as I can tell, there were really no multi-party negotiations, or let's put it this way, not everybody was at the table when Israel itself got its mandate from the UN.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like, there's a couple of things. One is I want to, it's a little bit interesting that before the vote, the U.S. was like going to like all the countries on the council and saying like, look, let's not bring this up. Can you do us a favor? And it's because they didn't want to have the vote and they didn't want to come out to be seen as against a Palestinian state. And I think that really shows the kind of game that's played here, which is that the idea of a two-state solution, a Palestinian state, is basically used as a rhetorical lip service. Like, it's something you pay tribute to, but you never actually act on, and you never actually do. And I think it's actually interesting that the countries that they were going to trying to say, like, let's not bring this to a vote, they didn't listen to the United States. The U.S. has almost zero credibility on the international stage on this, not just like in the global South, but like among traditional allies in Europe and Asia.
Yeah, that I think is really the telling thing. This is, if you wanted to take a temperature and see where the rest of the world is relative to their listening to the U.S., 2 abstentions is the best that the U.S. could do. And I think that is
UK and Switzerland.
Very telling, frankly.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I mean, of course, the UK are the lapdogs of America, so that's not surprising. But this is really an example of American exceptionalism, and it goes back to like Emma's point about the immense power of the Israeli lobby, and the fact that the U.S. has carved out a very special position for Israel, which they give to no other country, and the fact that even among that, American exceptionalism, Joe Biden is an outlier to even that. Like, he does not even have the self-respect of a Bush Senior or a Clinton or an Obama or a Reagan, who all at particular points said to Israel, enough is enough. Like, Joe Biden does not have that in him. And that's what makes this a very scary moment.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the sort of, I guess, the some of the politics around this. Like, it seems now that the majority of Democrats, and a significant majority, are against, this unconditional support to Israel. And they're, prior to this exchange with Iran, it seemed like there was at least some building momentum to condition aid. We'll talk a little bit about the supplemental that's winding its way through, but I was really struck by the protest that we saw, I guess it was yesterday, at Columbia University. Mm-hmm. Because it does remind me, we've mentioned, South Africa. It reminds me of when I was in college, when we were having this big fight to divest from South Africa. And Ronald Reagan was like, constructive engagement, sort of made up a term for this. But there were there were a lot of students on that campus, and they brought in a bunch of cops to arrest them. Apparently, I've learned from Twitter that Columbia is very, very particular about their lawns in their quad there, apparently.
And their gate situation, which they closed because of all these outside agitators,
But these were very peaceful protests. I mean, that's the thing that really struck me. They're bringing in hundreds of cops to arrest just a Thursday afternoon sitting on the quad protest. It was pretty crazy.
Well, I mean, the most remarkable thing is, the administration that called it in, and the NYPD in their statement said, well, these were peaceful protesters, and we didn't actually see anything, that was going on here, but we were called in, right? So the administration of Columbia University is officially like more like let's crack heads than the NYPD.
And I just to be clear with people, this is how they did it. They basically revoked the rights of students to hang out on the quad, essentially, on this day. So it was trespassing that they were arrested for. And that's bizarre.
It's an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing. And particularly since, we have a long history of this going back to the Vietnam War and the South African protests, where, it's actually a very bad thing for a university president to call in the cops on protesters. That's a good way to lose your legitimacy with faculty and with students. But I mean, university presidents are facing pressure from another end. One is political. They're being dragged before Congress in these kind of show trials, to say, what are you doing to fight anti-Semitism? But also from the donor class. And I saw a really interesting analysis of this, which is that the universities are being hit on two pressure points. One is from the donor class, which includes a lot of people that are, either pro-Israel or just pro-status quo. They don't like protest. They don't like disruption. And then they have the students, which are politically very different and increasingly, like international. This is one way American universities continue to go. They get students from all over the world, and therefore are far more progressive on this than the donors. But the university needs both for income, right? They need the student tuition and they need the donors to give grants and alumni funding. Basically, it's like which side are you on question, and a lot of university administrations are, well, the donors they write the big checks, right. That is the side that they're on, and I think that's a pretty grave mistake.
Well, I mean, look, you're going to get phone calls from donors. You're not getting calls from prospective students,
but
right? They don't know who
they
are yet.
They're also not listening to the teachers on their campuses, right?
Yeah.
That's the other thing, where the administrators are basically, as you're saying, Jeet, responsive to the donor class and the big money donors, specifically at these elite universities. And you have the professors who are engaging with these topics and want to preserve free expression on campuses, the exact place where you should be having these discussions. This is what liberal education is ostensibly supposed to be for, and the administrators are actively and including the Columbia president, who went in front of Congress and did not provide really any defense for her student body or the academic freedom at the institution.
And who actually criticized professors at her own university, right. Slandered, professors there, which is a really shocking thing. I think that the university presidents are in an untenable position. And to go back to the South African example, I think it was Giamatti in the father of the actor, who's the president at Yale. Yale.
Who was a former Major League Baseball commissioner as well, but he was also.
I did not know that, actually.
He called in the cops on South African protesters, and that was basically the end of his reign as president. He lost huge amount of legitimacy, and did not have faculty support, and even among the donor class, it is the big donors that are for this, but there's a lot of medium level donors, who are just normal liberal Democrats, and they're seeing this stuff and they're not liking it. So I just think it really shows you, in stark relief, the power centers, where the power is and how much power is at odds with democratic sentiment.
It's going to be interesting too to see how what trajectory this sends this generation on in terms of its politics. I think you made that point on Twitter, that it's sort of making clear whose toes are where and whose toes are being stepped on.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's something I think about a lot. I mean, we obviously have the example of the '60s. But it's also the case, and a lot of this has a racial dimension as well. I mean, a lot of the sort of changes in the university are, you get, this cohort that are immigrants, people of color, often the first of their family to go to university. And the valedictorian at University of South Carolina, who was denied, a top student, valedictorian,
USC in California.
That's California. Yeah, who's not allowed to speak because of her pro-Palestine sentiment. So you're going to get these people who are, traditionally you want to integrate them into the American elite. You want to make these people, your next generation of leaders, but they're learning, what the contradictions of power are in America. Right. It's a huge alienating effect. I'm hoping it doesn't depoliticize people, but sends them in the right direction.
Yeah, I have a feeling this is not going to depoliticize people in the way that maybe some some element of people coming out of the 60s were depoliticized.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as broad based as what was going on with that generation. There was a lot more, there was a lot of different factors, I think, involved in that aren't here in the same way. And frankly, I think ultimately, you know, the odd thing is that there is pretty, to the extent that there's a silent majority, they are probably in agreement with those protesters. Oddly enough, they may not be as motivated, and they may not, you know, it may not be as high on their agenda. But if they were forced to decide, I think it's pretty close. Certainly, the majority of American public now is just sort of like, this is too much. What's going on.